Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this session on the state of ransomware with Jon Hope from Sophos. ADM have been working with Sophos for a number of years, and they are our recommended security provider for antivirus, MDR, and cloud security. Now, Jon joined Sophos in 2010, and he's an excellent speaker. He now does talks to Sophos all over the country. And without further ado, I'd like to pass over to our speaker today. So over to you, Jon.
Fantastic. Right. Thanks for the introduction there. You've nicked the opening gambit, which is that, my name is Jon Hope. I'm Senior Technology Evangelist here at Sophos. I'm delighted to be presenting on behalf of all the team at ADM this morning. I've been at Sophos since 2010. I've done lots of different jobs during my time. I'm now our Senior Technology Evangelist, which means I get to spend lots of time doing public presentations and speaking at events just like this, and in person and online, actually not just the UK, but also Ireland, Nordics and Baltics as well. So my passport is looking rather full, I'm glad to say, but it's always a pleasure to be talking about the world of cybersecurity, particularly, of course, because it is always changing and constantly evolving. And in order to really articulate the need for human-led threat hunting, which is really the key topic of conversation for this session, it's probably a good starting point that we consider the threat landscape and take a look at the world of cybersecurity as we see it. Actually, just thinking about it before I dive into that, I should have said, if you want to ask any questions as we go through, just for everybody's clarity, you are on mute at the moment, but if you do have something you want to ask, feel free to drop it into the Q&A or the chat dialog box. I will try and keep an eye on it, but if I don't get around to answering those or don't see those, then Isaac's going to be reading those questions out at the end of the session as well. So if there's anything you want to ask or contribute, then feel free to drop it in there and we'll pick those up at the end. Threat landscape, what is going on in the world of cybersecurity? Well, I could tell you that the world of cyber is a scary place, but you probably knew that given that you've come to a cybersecurity webinar. And rather than give you my own opinions, I thought it would actually be beneficial to reference some actual evidence. So I'm going to present statistics from two white papers that we publish at Sophos. The first of which you'll find on the left-hand side there, that is a State of Ransomware report. Now, this is something that we produce every year at Sophos. It is effectively a survey. So we contract a third-party agency to basically conduct a survey of 5,000 network administrators, so IT managers, decision makers, budget holders, people probably very much like yourselves, from all across the world. They are selected for us at random. We have no influence over that. We don't even ask them what they're doing about cybersecurity, and they're certainly not selected as being Sophos customers. So when you see some of the stats as we go through, do just bear in mind that these people probably aren't Sophos customers. And what we do want to find out from them is their experiences of cyber, what incidents are they having, how are they handling those incidents. So it is an interesting survey. The other one on the right-hand side is the active adversary report. Now, this is more first-hand evidence. So we support directly through monitoring telemetry 23,500 organizations worldwide through our MDR service. Our own products feed us telemetry on interesting events and things that we've seen, and we also operate an incident response service, which is essentially the cyber fire brigade. You can call us up whether you're a Sophos customer or not, and we will help you exit a cyber incident in the best possible state as part of that engagement, all of which gives us exposure to the tools and techniques that the cyber criminals utilize. So that is much more first-hand evidence. So I'm going to blend in statistics and information from both of those two reports. Incidentally, they are both free of charge. They're available on the Sophos website, again, whether you're a customer of ours or not. So you are highly encouraged to go and read those. They are both really, really good, genuinely interesting reading. However, I will save you the heavy lift of reading those right now. We'll start by some of the hard statistics. The first of which is that 56% of those respondents in that survey of 5,000 organizations experienced at least one ransomware outbreak in the 12 months running up to the survey. So what this tells us is ransomware is and continues to be a significant challenge. If you thought that stat was high, actually, interestingly, we have seen a bit of a dip. So last year it was 65% of organizations. So whether that means ransomware is tailing off is difficult to say at this point. There are, of course, lots of other techniques that cyber criminals can use, and we're seeing various different approaches as well as ransomware. So it could be a combination of one of those two things. Interestingly as well, 70% of those attacks actually involved successful encryption of data. So at a really high level, the fundamentals of how ransomware work is that the cyber criminals will try and get hold of your data. They will encrypt it, so they'll jumble it up in such a way that they are the only ones who can put it back together again. And then victims have a stark choice as to whether to pay the ransom or accept that the data is lost. So encryption is absolutely key to the underlying technique of ransomware. And as you can see there, 70% of those attacks actually involve successful encryption of data, which is slightly down from 76%, but it still means that in 70% of cases, the incumbent cybersecurity protection that the organization was running was not adequate or not properly configured, or certainly in some way has let the victim down. So that is obviously a serious worry. What is an even more significant challenge and a bigger worry, certainly for me as a cyber practitioner, is that 56% of those organizations who had their data encrypted, then they subsequently elected to pay the ransom. So they felt their best or their only option was to pay the crims off in the hope that they got their data back. And I cannot emphasize enough how, if we can avoid it, that is a really bad state of affairs, because by paying the cyber criminals off, we're effectively funding organized crime. We are perpetuating this problem, and actually we're encouraging more people into, I'm going to call it an industry because it is of that kind of scale now. So we're effectively kicking the can down the road and just perpetuating the issue if we keep paying. And that's actually, as a trend, worryingly gone up from 46% last year. So paying the ransom is becoming more popular, even though the ransom demands themselves have gone up. So ransom demands in excess of $1 million are now not out of kilter, and overall the cost of ransomware is an eye-watering $2.73 million, which incorporates things like regulatory fines, paying the ransom, downtime, loss of business opportunity, regulatory fines, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know what kind of organization you're involved in and you work at, but suffice to say that ransomware is a significant challenge, and it consistently puts organizations out of business. So if the figure of $2.73 million looks unrealistic to you, suffice to say another way is that ransomware will put organizations out of business. That is the unfortunate stark reality. So who are the popular targets? That's a really interesting conversation, and it's one that's probably best illustrated by doing a bit of a split. So we'll look at 2023 first of all, which is the orange statistics in there. So you can see that there were certain sectors that were really popular during 2023. Education being the most popular sector, followed by organizations like energy, oil, gas, utilities, and the property and construction sector in particular. These are all organizations that are typically underfunded, under-resourced, and were considered to be soft targets by the cyber criminals. So they're motivated by ROI in the same way that legit business would be. They're looking at, how do I cash out as quickly and easily as possible? You'll see that they are typically shying away from the IT sector, because that is a sector which generally invests the most and is the most tech savvy and probably has the best personnel. So tough target, probably not the most attractive. However, if you look at the statistics in blue, you'll see that actually the likelihood of being hit, whichever sector you happen to be in, is actually pretty much leveled out, with a couple of outlying exceptions. So what this is telling us is organizations of all different sectors are now increasingly in the firing line, and it actually doesn't matter as well. I didn't split this out by vertical, by organization size, but if you look at that horizontal, then organizations that are typically smaller in size are actually becoming popular targets as well. And that's a combination of the fact that smaller organizations typically invest less and therefore are a little bit more vulnerable, but also because the actual cost of delivering ransomware is dropping. As cyber criminals get more organized, they're effectively industrializing the process of ransomware delivery. So whereas in the past it might have been quite an expensive exercise to launch an attack, now it's a lot more straightforward, and particularly because of the franchise model, which I'll come on to in a second, all of a sudden smaller businesses are becoming viable targets. So effectively, the takeaway from that is that whichever sector you happen to be in, ransomware is a very real and present danger, unfortunately. So who are behind these attacks? Who's launching them? Well, this is what the media would have you believe that a cyber criminal looks like. They're often portrayed as typically teenagers, typically wearing hoodies, typically hanging out in mom and pop's basement in a darkened room. But the reality couldn't be further from the truth. Practically all ransomware is delivered by one of a very small number of highly organized criminal gangs. And we know a lot about the structure of these gangs because of this particular one up here on the right hand side here called Conti. Conti were if you wind the clock back to 2021, Conti were the A game players in ransomware during that year. So they were responsible for just slightly more than a quarter of ransomware worldwide. These guys were actually at the top of their game. And you'll see in 2022 that number fell to less than 5%. And now Conti as an organization doesn't exist anymore. The reason for that is because of a very public disagreement. So Conti is basically was headquartered in Russia. However, many of the affiliates, so many of the franchisors of that group were actually Ukrainian citizens. So when Conti's leadership announced very publicly that they were going to support activities that Russia was carrying out in the Ukraine using cyber means, the Ukrainian contingent wasn't massively on board with that particular message. And as a result, the organization effectively fell apart. So a huge amount of data spilled out of that organization. And what we learned is a whole heap of data about the methodologies that cyber criminals use and also the structure of the organization. So as a result of that leak, we now need to be thinking less teenager in the basement, more like line manager, monthly target, monthly salary, career progression, marketing, HR, basically everything you find in a legitimate business, with the exception of where they're actually going about making their money. So these guys are highly organized groups. Why this is important? Well, you don't even have to hop onto YouTube to see the financial prowess of these organizations. There are many videos of them driving around the streets of Moscow in various different supercars, literally doing donuts around police cars. But it's not just about the financial wealth, it's also about the wealth of human resources. There is no end of human resources available to carry out these attacks. Excuse me. Now, the reality is that practically all of these cyber attacks are now delivered by a hands-on keyboard operative. So instead of just launching malware, there instead is actually a human attacker at the end of the line. And this presents a really significant problem for cybersecurity vendors because code at a fundamental level is actually relatively easy to block. It's easy to contain, because code behaves predictably. It works the same way time and time again. So once you've seen something once, it's quite easy to block it. However, human beings are notoriously unpredictable. They have the ability to problem solve. They have the opportunity to try different techniques, try different tactics. And it means that containing human operated attacks is actually extremely difficult. So what are we as a vendor doing about that? Well, there's a couple of technology innovations that I wanted to introduce to you very briefly. The first of which is around remote encryption. Now, before I actually go into what remote encryption is and how we contain it, I just wanted to illustrate the scale of this particular challenge. According to our own research, 87% of attacks now involve remote encryption. Microsoft will tell you it's 60%, but whichever statistic you want to go with, it is still a significant proportion of attacks. Interestingly, practically every cybersecurity vendor has no defense against this attack methodology. So let me explain how it works. This is a really basic customer network, and what we've got here in red is one device on your estate that is not successfully configured. It may not be protected, or it's underprotected, as in it's not configured properly. How many of you could categorically say that every device in your estate is protected? We once did an incident investigation in an organisation with just 7 seats, and even then, one of them actually was unprotected. So the cyber criminals love that unprotected device. They'll get hold of it. But rather than actually attack that device directly, they will utilize it as a bridgehead to conduct reconnaissance. They'll find other devices in the estate that have interesting and juicy data on them, and they will launch a remote process to encrypt the files on that device rather than trying to attack the device itself. And this is a really big problem for most cybersecurity vendors because they are only interested in the code and the processes executing on the device they are protecting. So when this remote command comes in from somewhere else encrypting the data, it is blindsiding practically every cybersecurity vendor. And from there on, you've got a bunch of encrypted data and you've got the standard methodology of demanding a ransom in order to return that data back to its original state. So that's a really big challenge. Bearing in mind, like I said, as many as 87% of these attacks include this form of attack methodology. Not having a defense against it isn't great. Our stance is that thanks to our Intercept X technology, we have this covered. Let's play fair and say in the same scenario here, we've still got an unprotected device. Cybercriminals get hold of that. They find some data somewhere else in the estate. They will attempt to encrypt it. However, there is a feature on Intercept X called Crypto Guard, which is actually not looking at the processes that are running on that device, but actually looking at the sovereignty and integrity of the data itself. So in a process where the data is being encrypted, even if it's come from another device, what we do is we look at the data in a before state, we look at how it's been written, and then we look at doing a comparison. And what we're actually interested in is the randomness of data. So if that data has all of a sudden gone from a structured file format like a PowerPoint presentation, for example, and now all of a sudden it's jumbled up by the cyber criminals, we will detect that and spot that there is a high likelihood that it has been encrypted. If we see that behavior happening consistently, one of two things happens. We will first actually block the encryption attempt from carrying out any further encryption commands. So we remotely block that device from carrying out any further commands across the rest of the estate. We also put the data back to its original state. So we keep a private copy that we can utilize to put the data back to its original state. And then we flag the device up to Sophos Central so the administrator can, one, go and remediate, and also roll out some protection on that device to make sure it's secure. So that's how we deal with the issue of ransomware when it's being conducted in a remote fashion. What we also do as well is we also have a new feature which is part of Intercept X called Adaptive Attack Protection. Now, the reality is, unfortunately, that when you've got a determined human being that is skilled, it is only a matter of time before they figure out some way of getting into an estate and causing some damage. No matter what protection you've got, no matter how well defended you might be, eventually something will give. There will be some opportunity to get in. It is a little bit akin to me sitting outside of your house with a lockpicking kit and YouTube for guidance. I'm by no means a safe breaker, but you give me enough time and statistics will tell you that eventually I will get in. It's just an unfortunate reality. What we try to do with adaptive attack protection is actually take the luxury of time away from the cyber criminal. So where Intercept X detects the telltale signs of a human operative, trying different techniques, doing different things, it will go into a mode of operation where we will actually remove the tools that cyber criminals love to use. So they love to use things like PowerShell. They love to use things like RDP. They used to love the network stack as an opportunity to pivot around the organization. So we take all those tools away from the cyber criminal. This has two effects. One, obviously, it blocks the attack, but it also tends to target the cyber criminal. So they'll spend a bit of time trying different techniques, trying different things, and wasting their time before eventually, bearing in mind that they're motivated by ROI, it becomes a point where if it's too challenging, it's too difficult, they give up, they walk away, they go find another victim somewhere else. So this is now a standard feature of Intercept X on all licensing tiers. And it's something which is automatically be switched on your behalf if you happen to be a Sophos customer already. So your Intercept X is already doing this for you, and it's a fantastic addition to our capabilities. And then we also have the critical attack warning. So one of the things that we discovered is within Sophos Central, many times administrators are getting notifications that their estate is under attack, but they don't often do anything about it. People don't often log into their antivirus console, their malware protection console. So we break out of the confines of that. Critical attack warning will notify you using your mobile device. We will call you, we'll try emailing you, we'll try all these different techniques to make sure you're aware that you're under some sort of attack scenario. And you'll be presented with this dashboard in the center there when you do log into Sophos Central. And there are 3 calls to action, or 3 options. One is to investigate the attack yourself. Second is to contact your Sophos partner, of course, ADM, and they can help you out with that issue. Or alternatively, you can contact our incident response. Remember, our cyber fire brigade, you can contact us for additional assistance as well. You'll notice the option of doing nothing is not there, because if you're seeing red banners like this, you are about to have a really bad day. So doing nothing is not an option. And then we also have the account health check. So again, this is a standard feature of Intercept X. This is looking at your configuration to make sure that you haven't made any glaring errors. So it's always worth checking your health check score, bearing in mind the second best thing to an unprotected device to a cyber criminal is a device that's not properly configured. So this is always a good way of making sure that you're getting the most out of your Sophos product. However, even with all of those technology measures in place, the reality is that technology on its own is not always enough to protect against every type of threat. Mostly because of the different cybercrime techniques that the cyber criminals love to utilize. So there's a couple of examples I want to talk to you about that illustrate this point. One of them is the multi-stage attack. So I gave you a really basic example of a multi-stage attack. Remember the remote ransomware. So one device gets compromised, the data on another device gets encrypted. Now expand that story out to include things like supply chain attacks, and all of a sudden it becomes really difficult to track an attack and work out what the big picture looks like. So that is one way the cyber criminals tend to evade capture. They also love to abuse credentials. So cyber criminals increasingly log in rather than break in. So if they can compromise an individual using things like phishing, then they will utilize the data that they've collected there from login details, for example, and then use them against the organization. Then you've also got the technique of living off the land. This is where the cyber criminals will utilize legitimate IT tools against an organization. So instead of launching malware, they might be using things like RDP or PowerShell to deploy malicious content. They might even bring their own vulnerable software to the party, install something that's vulnerable, and then exploit it. This is an incredibly common technique. And they love to exploit weaknesses as well. So weaknesses in terms of unpatched machines, unmanaged devices, but also weakness from an operational perspective in terms of maybe when there are no IT staff around, for example. So all of these things mean that technology on its own is not enough. For example, finding multi-stage attacks it requires human intuition. Telling the difference between legitimate tools being used versus legitimate tools being used in a bad way is, again, human intervention. And so is credential abuse. How can you tell the difference between me logging in legitimately versus the cyber criminals using my identity against me? Again, this is another really significant challenge, none of which can be solved by AI and technology of any type on its own, unfortunately. And we can see this shift towards these kind of attack vectors. If you look at the use of even technology-driven attacks like exploited vulnerabilities, you'll see the popularity of that has dropped, and the use of compromised credentials, which is impossible for technology to detect on its own, going up there to 50%. So you can see this shift. You can also see the cyber criminals targeting organizations at their weakest. If you consider working hours to be 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on a weekday, which is pretty generous for most organizations, even with that taken into account, 91% of attacks of ransomware actually occur during out of hours. So when organizations are not looking at telemetry, they're not monitoring their estate. The cyber criminals are also getting much quicker as well. So we used to measure dwell time being the time between a cyber criminal gets in to when they carry out their action and objective, which is typically to encrypt data. We used to measure that in terms of weeks and months. Now it is a matter of days. So you'll see there ransomware by far and away the most common attack vector. More than 50% of those cases, the whole attack is done and dusted in just 5 days or less. So it's giving us less time to work out that the cyber criminals are at play and doing bad stuff before they actually carry out their action and objective. So the window of opportunity to thwart these attacks before they become significant is reducing. So how do we combat these challenges? Well, like I said, there is enough opportunity, even into a small window as 5 days, to detect that the cyber criminals are actually at play before they start tripping off virus alerts and actually doing the really bad stuff. We can use log data to find those things. However, unfortunately, the reality is that in many cases, organizations don't see the warning signs. They don't see these things in their logs. In as many, in fact, as 83% of the cases that we investigate, you're using incident response, then there are loads of telltale signs. The crims get in, they move laterally, they exfiltrate data, they install malicious software, they escalate privileges, and then eventually they launch ransomware. There are loads of these breadcrumb trails inside an organization's log data. Trouble is, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack sometimes. I mean, think about your organization, think about the amount of data that is generated in log files. There must be a huge volume of data. Every PC, every laptop, every switch, every router, every firewall, every access point, every piece of software probably is creating some form of log data. And there might be just one or two telltale signs inside that organization. And in order to really find those things, you need to have the very best tools to do that. And we do offer a set of tools that help organizations to look at that log data. So we have an XDR tool that is an add-on to our Intercept X protection that helps organizations conduct their own threat hunts. And we do that through a whole host of additional capabilities that we've recently invested in. So one of the neat things is actually being able to pull in third-party telemetry as well. So not just looking at the logs that your Sophos products is generating, but also a bunch of other cybersecurity products as well. And then when you start to conduct threat hunts, you'll see there's a really nice threat experience there that shows you which are the priority cases that need investigation, whether that be generated from Sophos telemetry, whether it be generated from somewhere else, helping you prioritize the cases. And actually, you can work collaboratively as well. So if you've got a team of threat analysts and investigators, they can all work together on a case book. You can put hypotheses and notes in there and all that sort of clever stuff. And of course, not just looking at our own telemetry, as I've already mentioned, but also a wide range of other third-party products as well. So that gives you the best tools that you can to carry out these threat investigations, and it's worked. You can see here that we are one of the most highly rated threat platforms for XDR. This is using the G2 survey. If you're not familiar with G2, by the way, this is somewhat akin to TripAdvisor for cybersecurity. This is not what the analysts think. This is not what the experts think. This is based on feedback from users. And you'll see there that we are not only one of the highest rated platforms, but also one of the most commonly reviewed platforms as well. So that's great news and a ringing endorsement of all the changes we've made in XDR to make it as good a platform as it can be to help you do your own threat hunts. I will temper that with saying that, of course, we already learned that technology on its own isn't enough to combat some of these threats. But also it's worth mentioning that going out and buying a set of tools to do threat hunts doesn't make you a threat hunter. In the same way that me going out and buying a set of boxing gloves probably doesn't equip me to actually be a fighter. Tools is one thing, the ability to utilize them is something else. So for many organizations, we believe that cybersecurity is a challenge which is probably too great for them to do on their own. Being a really good network administrator, being a good IT manager is not the same as being a threat analyst. And even if you are a really good threat analyst, then you need to have eyes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because we've already seen that cyber criminals love to attack out of hours. And most organizations simply cannot stretch to having that level of expertise available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's just unrealistic for most organizations to be able to provide that level of SOC service, which is why we also offer our customers our managed detection and response service. So what this is, in a nutshell, is a fully managed 24/7 team of experts that are looking at the data coming from your estate and detecting the types of attacks that tech on its own wouldn't prevent, and then potentially responding on your behalf. So it helps with this monitoring of telemetry. What our team do is they take telemetry, not of course just from Sophos products, but also this really wide range of other cybersecurity products. So things that will be relevant to this audience, I'm pretty sure most of you are running Microsoft technology. I suspect, knowing ADM pretty well, that many of you will be running WatchGuard firewalls, for example. Those are just a couple of examples of other sources of telemetry that we can bring into our MDR service. And that telemetry basically means that whatever tools you've got, rather than us having that awkward conversation about tearing away technology and replacing it with other things, we will work alongside those technologies as well. And actually, we help you get the very best ROI from the tech you've already invested in. If you're running Microsoft security and you're not looking at the log data it's producing, you probably aren't getting the best out of that product, for example. So helping you unlock the maximum ROI from the things you've already invested in. What we do with it, well, whether it be Sophos-derived telemetry, whether it be from a third party, everything goes through this process, first of all. So we ingest the data, but then we go through a process of standardizing it, normalizing it, correlating it, before eventually placing it in front of a human analyst. Now, sounds easy on paper, and it makes a very pretty diagram, but actually some of these things are quite challenging. So I thought I would just show you a little peek behind the scenes of some of the challenges that we have. The first of which is the data problem. So if you've never seen a firewall log before, today's your lucky day. What I'm going to show you here is the same alert being generated and being interpreted by 3 different firewall vendors. So the top one there, vendor A, will tell you this is threat level 4. The middle one there, vendor B, tells you this is threat level 7. It's also a severity high. It's also severity level critical and has a score of 50. So that vendor's got all the stats there and doesn't really know what it means to itself. And then you've also got vendor C down the bottom there who has this attack level 9. Now, I don't know as an independent body, is 9 good because 10's a really mundane attack, or is 9 really bad because 10 means the world's on fire? I mean, what does that mean? How does that map to high, medium, and low severity, right? So the first problem is everybody looks at things in a different way. So when we create an integration to work with a different cybersecurity vendor, one of the first things we do is we create a standardization template. So basically, by the time we've run through this process, all the alerts look the same. So when our analyst looks at an alert, they see the same scoring system, they see the same schema, and it means that everybody can work off the same hymn sheet. It makes things a lot more straightforward. So we standardize everything. The next thing that we do is correlate. So I'm going to give you a real sneaky behind the scenes here. You will never see this dashboard as an MDR customer, but it is interesting to see what our analysts see. So this weird, I think it looks like a sea creature kind of looking creature. This is actually how our platform interprets a phishing attack. So what you've got on the left-hand side of that diagram is a whole bunch of endpoints. They were all running Windows in this scenario, just by the way. So running Windows Defender. On the right-hand side there, you've got the anti-spam solution, which in this case was Proofpoint. And what we see here is a phishing attack that is targeting this organization. And this organization has just 100 seats, so it's not a big organization. And yet with the phishing attack, they still managed to generate 234 alerts. Now, our analysts could look at 234 alerts, but that would take a long time. Our platform automatically correlates it down. So what it's doing is giving them one notification. This organization is under a phishing attack. And if you're a fan of MITRE, we've matched this to technique T1192, which is a spear phishing attack with a link. In other words, these emails are coming in with a link on there. It's encouraging the victims to click on the link, and who knows what happens next. So the analyst has got all the data that they need. We know where the emails come from. We know who the recipients are. We know what the URL is that it's trying to get people to click on. We know if there's an attachment, and then from there, the administrator at our end, the MDR operative, they could pivot to do all sorts of different threat searches. They could, for example, go to the firewall and say, well, how many people clicked on the link? How many people went to the website? How many people have this attachment using XDR? How many people open the attachment using XDR? So all these kind of things are all possible. They've got one alert, however, to work on as a starting point, because we really want them to have the most information there as quickly as possible. In fact, it typically takes just 1 minute to go from an interesting event through to actually having a case in front of a human analyst. So it's taken me way longer to explain that it actually happens in reality. So that's the first thing that happens. Now, our administration team, our threat hunters, typically take 25 minutes on average to go through the case. Is it real? Is it a significant problem? If it is, how big's the problem? What's the scope? What do we do about it next? Then there is a fork in the road. So for some of our users and consumers of MDR, they are sufficiently cyber mature that we could hand the case to them and they can go fix the problem themselves. Some organizations rely on their managed security partner, so we could be calling their provider, in this case obviously ADM, or alternatively many organizations are quite happy for us to fix the problem and make it go away. And if we do that, it takes typically a further 12 minutes to remediate the issue, which means you've got a mean time to respond of about 38 minutes. which is essentially the bones of why you buy MDR, because we can shut down an incident so quickly. To give you some context, because I appreciate 38 minutes is an arbitrary number that may have no meaning to you whatsoever. If we were to compare to an internal security team, I found a Gartner survey across the top bar there. And bearing in mind, if you've got a security team internally, you're probably a bank, a major airline, a hotel group, something of that ilk. The median time to respond, even with those kind of groups, is 16 hours. Now, 16 hours is an eternity, and it's an eternity in which nothing good is going to happen. The crims will be encrypting data, stealing data, leaving back doors, giving themselves an opportunity to come back later on. Nothing good is going to happen during that time. Okay, so shutting down the incident in as little as 38 minutes is absolutely paramount to delivering superior cybersecurity outcomes. And that's demonstrated by the fact you'll find us on the top right-hand corner for G2 for our MDR service. So again, this is TripAdvisor for cybersecurity. This is actually done by people who utilize our service. So it speaks volumes that people rate it so highly, primarily because of the superior cybersecurity outcomes we deliver. There is a bit of a hidden benefit as well, which I love to expose, not just the process of fixing issues, but we are the world's largest provider of MDR services when you look at organization count. So 23,500 organizations worldwide rely on our MDR service for their protection. And that means that we are sufficiently large that even our closest two competitors, you add those together, they're not nowhere near that number. And I'm not telling you that from a position of arrogance. The reason I want to illustrate how big we are is because it means that we get the opportunity to carry out many more investigations. And we never waste any of the data that we find during these investigations. So not only are we going to shut down the issue, but then subsequently what we'll also do is pass that information over to Sophos Labs. Sophos Labs are the people that actually make our products. So if we carry out an investigation, let's go back to that phishing example, right? If that's a new phishing attack from a new email address, it's got a new URL on there, it's got a new attachment on there. These are all indicators of compromise, IOCs as they're often called, or TTPs, tools and techniques that we can bake into our products. So we use that telemetry to actually harden our products and make them better. Even if that telemetry in that case came from Microsoft, it came from Proofpoint. Thank you very much indeed to both of those vendors, because you've just made our products better. Because all the telemetry and data that we found, within about 45 minutes, we've gone through this loop and we are then protecting using our products. So this is like a really big cybersecurity community that you buy into, that everybody benefits from an incident. If, for example, we investigate a phishing attack in deepest, darkest Peru, 45 minutes later, customers in Kent are actually being protected against that threat. So that is a hugely unique advantage to us, having so many organizations under our protection, but also having the ability to block using products as well. So really nice loop that we go through. Just one more thing before I bring this session to a close that's worth mentioning. It is obviously fantastic that we can carry out threat investigations so quickly and have such a high rate of success of shutting down those attacks. But actually, do you know what? The best threat investigations that we have are the ones that we never really conducted in the first place. And we learned a lot from looking at incidents and how cyber criminals get in. And one of the things that we discovered is that exploited vulnerabilities are still the most popular attack vector for cyber criminals. So this is where devices are unpatched or not successfully updated, or there's weak software or whatever it might be, but some kind of technical vulnerability. So we decided to partner with Tenable, who are industry leaders in the world of exposure management. And we now offer, in addition to MDR, also a managed risk service. What we will do as part of this service is we will scan your network periodically. We will look at your estate and highlight to you what vulnerabilities you have, and also give you guidance on priority orders and how to fix the problems in the most focused fashion. So helping you get on top of patching, because let's face it, who is on top of patching? It's a never-ending task. So keeping on top of that, doing the important stuff first is really neat. So this is a lovely additional service that we offer. What it also helps with as well is that broader peace of mind. Let's imagine for a moment that we have a similar scenario to a Log4j kind of style incident, right? So what we've got here on our hands is a widely present vulnerability, which previously undiscovered is immediately exploited in the wild, and it is a high impact level attack. So it's this kind of perfect storm of nobody knew this was a problem, and then all of a sudden the cyber criminals are using it. Now you're going to see headlines in the papers, on TV, telling you about this problem. Managed risk plus MDR gives you this wonderful peace of mind scenario. So managed risk will immediately look at your estate, and within a very short space of time, they can say, hey, you are not vulnerable to this attack, or alternatively, you are exposed to this and you need to go patch XYZ and do these things. Right. So we're gonna solve that problem and give you the peace of mind that your organization is protected from future attacks. But what also happens is that kicks off an MDR case, and our MDR analysts will actually go back through your telemetry and they can tell you whether you've previously been exploited by this attack methodology. So within a matter of a short space of time, you've gone from a scenario of seeing in the newspapers and thinking, does this affect my organization, to having total peace of mind that you have not been affected with this issue historically and you're not going to be exposed to it moving forward. So the two services together offer this really good peace of mind value. So there might just be a couple of things that you're thinking about in terms of objections, and I am going to come on to Q&A at the end as well. So if there's anything else on your mind, let me know. But some of the things we often come across is, well, I've got a team of IT people. What happens to them? Key emphasis here is that we are not replacing basic IT functions. This is a threat hunting service. Probably most organizations don't have threat hunters. Being a really good IT administrator, you crack on, you be the best administrator you can be. Let us deal with threat hunting is the key message. If you do have an existing security team, first of all, well, that is great. Good on you for being so cyber mature. However, I would honestly question what those security teams are doing. Because the reality is most of them play this game, which I love to call alert whack-a-mole. They've got multiple dashboards, multiple screens, multiple alerts, all telling them that they need their attention, and they're all vying for that focus from the admin. And actually, they spend most of the time simply dismissing alerts and not actually doing anything particularly productive. So we can take the same SOC analyst and we can make them super sharp, because remember that single incident case that we've got there, we can directly tell this analyst, here's your problem, here's the infected machines, this is the telltale signs, this is what you need to go and do. So we can make your SOC analyst mega sharp as a result of this service. So there's absolutely a place for your internal team if you've got one. However, bear in mind, most organizations don't, and those that do probably don't have them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's okay. It's a team sport. If you don't have the ability to respond evenings, weekends, bank holidays, there's no point us calling you. We can help fix the problem. We basically work collaboratively. So we work with your existing teams, we work with your existing response processes, and of course, just going to put that slide back up there again, we work with your existing technology stack as well. So basically, MDR, Managed Detection Response Services, that meet you where you are today is effectively the message. So that brings me neatly on to pretty much the end of the content. Just as a quick summary, because I've said a lot in a short amount of time, cybercrime is evolving. The reality is that many attacks are now delivered using human operatives. The problem is that you can't go out and buy tech that is going to protect you against every one of these human-driven attacks. So you have a fundamental choice. You can align yourself to technologies like Sophos XDR for those of you who have teams of analysts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on stream. We can give them the tools that they need to help remediate those issues and detect those problems. For those organizations that don't have that round-the-clock expertise, MDR is here to provide threat hunting services and help keep your organization secure, giving you, again, the very best cybersecurity outcomes. So with all those things said, I have got a couple of minutes before we get to the top of the hour to answer any questions that you might have. So Isaac, I'm going to hand over to you, because I suspect you've hopefully got those questions in the box there. For those who haven't asked questions, please again use the chat dialogue box or use the Q&A panel. Either way, Isaac's got eyes on those, and we'll have a look. So Isaac, are there any questions in there already?
Thanks very much, John. First of all, just to quickly say, very informative, fantastic session.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So yeah, we're just going to do sort of informal, sort of 10 minutes here. I've got a couple of questions that I know that people are asking and things like that as well.
Okay.
So I guess one of the key ones at the moment, given the current climate, is what impact is the current geopolitical situation having on, cyber criminal activities?
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, that is a very good question. I mean, the first thing to emphasize is that in the vast majority of cases, the cyber criminals are financially motivated. So regardless of the geography they're actually from, they're in it to make money, and not typically for political purposes. So it is kind of, I want to say it's BAU, but it is pretty much business as usual for most cyber criminal gangs. We have, however, observed a drop in the quantities of ransomware, and that it's purely hypothesis, but it could be the distractions of current political climate. That is a possibility. There is always a possibility, and again, if you believe some of the leaks that came out from gangs like Conti, there is a possibility that many of the cybercrime protagonists become threat actors that operate at a state level. That is, it's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility. The geopolitical situation is probably a distraction, and that might lead to the reduction in ransomware, but it's probably business as usual. What it does mean for any organization, however, that is operating in any, I'm just going to call it politically divisive industry. So if you're an arms manufacturer or you're supplying the military or something like that, then you probably ought to be on your guard a little bit more, because the threat level is only going to escalate. But for many people, it is pretty much as it stands. It means we should all be on our guard, and we should all be, expecting some kind of incident. So I hope that answers the question. It's always, I mean, attribution and motivation are always really difficult things. But in practically every case we investigate, we are seeing financial demands, and it does tend to indicate that people are just in it for the money. Really, that is the reality.
Yes, yeah, indeed. And I guess playing off that one, what are some sort of, if you can sort of grab your crystal ball there for a minute, what are some emerging trends in cybersecurity that organizations should be sort of aware of in the coming years? What are Sophos seeing as the current trends and things?
Okay, really good question. So one of the big ones is we've seen the cyber criminals increasingly going after backups. And that's why we actually formed a partnership with Veeam, and we'll be also bringing some other backup vendors on stream pretty soon. We can actually take, remember I talked about taking third-party telemetry. Actually, backups tend to be the canary in the coal mine a little bit, because if you're going to hold an organization to ransom by encrypting their data, then if they've got a backup copy, why are they ever going to pay you? Right, you can just restore the backup. So destroying the backups, tampering the backups to mean that you can't access them. So changing things like MFA settings or changing things like usernames and passwords, effectively locking out organizations from their own backups is a big thing. So that is definitely a trend that we're observing. And again, I'm not here to sell backup. We don't even do backup, but if you've got a decent backup, that is a good defense against cybercrime in general, and is definitely good practice. However, having said that, we are also seeing an increase in double or even triple extortion attacks. And we're even seeing a bit of a move away from actually using encryption as a methodology. So what cyber criminals can also do is they can steal your data and then simply threaten to expose it publicly. The logic being that obviously many organizations do not want to experience the reputational damage, the regulatory fines that go with that. And then it means they don't even have to bother encrypting your data in the first place. What a double extortion attack is where they actually do both. So they encrypt your data and they steal your data, and then you rock in a hard place here, right? I can restore the backup, fine, but I've still lost my data, which means I'm still going to get regulatory fines, and cyber criminals will probably profit from selling that data, and they will attempt to hold you to ransom against that particular attack vector. And backup in itself is then no defense against that, because you're still going to lose your data and you're still going to have that ransom demand. So being able to detect the exfiltration of data at early doors and stop it is key. A triple extortion attack is a particularly cynical form of attack. This is where the cyber criminals will encrypt your data. They will steal your data. They will hold you to ransom for your encrypted data. They will then threaten to dox you, publicly expose your data, and extort more money that way. But when they've finished, they will also go after the individuals whose data has been compromised. And probably one of the worst examples of this, it's well documented. There was a mental health institution in Finland. They had an incident. Their data was stolen. It was encrypted. They went through the process of going through ransom demands for the two attack vectors there, the theft and encryption of data. But then the cyber criminals went after the individuals. Now, if you imagine a mental health institution, that's as sensitive a data as it gets, right? So they went then to the individuals, the poor unfortunate victims, and said, hey, we've stolen your data from this institution, and if you don't pay us a chunk of change, obviously a much smaller demand, but nevertheless a chunk of change, we will tell your employer, we'll tell your wife, we'll publish this data externally. And that's obviously highly devastating to those individuals. So yeah, this kind of process of really rinsing, and again it comes back to ROI, getting as much out of an attack as they possibly can, and it gives you an idea about the morality of these people as well. Okay, so it's just, yeah, it is an unfortunate state of affairs that we see that. So yeah, that's probably one of the biggest trends that we see. We're seeing the trend I've already mentioned about smaller organizations becoming victims, just because of the industrialization of this as a process, and the franchise model means that small organizations that maybe in the past you might be able to say, well, you know, I'm the Acme Sprocket company with 20 employees, I'm not interesting. Doesn't really work like that anymore, unfortunately. If you're online, if you've got data, you may well become a victim. That's probably one of the other big trends as well. So nobody, unfortunately, is safe, I'm afraid. So hopefully that answers some of the questions on trends that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you for that. I've got a little 2-in-1 question and then one final one to wrap up, which I've been asked a heck of a lot. So
Yeah.
the little 2-in-1 one is obviously there's a lot of antivirus security software providers out there.
Mhm.
And I know you sort of briefly mentioned this in the presentation itself, but could you just highlight some sort of key points and features of Sophos' cybersecurity solutions that first of all set you apart from other providers,
Yep.
and as a side to that,
Yep.
you know, something we get asked a lot: are there any inherent risks if a customer was to take all of their security, so say example antivirus and MDR and cloud from Sophos alone?
Okay.
That, you know, a little piece on that would be quite useful, I think.
Good question. Actually, those two things link into each other quite nicely. So thanks whoever asked that question. That's a really good question. I'm going to do it back to front, actually, if you don't mind. So one of the reasons that people used to think about having different cybersecurity providers in different places on their network was really down to this concept of defense in depth, and it harks back to a time when security vendors would go out there and they would get security signatures for every type of virus that they saw. So the basic methodology was Sophos would, for example, get hold of as much malware as they could, create a signature and send it out to all of our customers as a signature that their antivirus could look at. Now, it was basically a race to the finish, and whoever was going to be the fastest would give you the best protection. Now, in some circumstances, another vendor, like your firewall vendor, might get a signature before your antivirus vendor, or vice versa. So this logic of then having multiple different suppliers means if one of them is particularly slow on one signature, then the other one might be faster, and there is an element of logic to that. The reality is, of course, that pretty much every cybersecurity vendor uses AI very heavily, and it means that, for one, we don't even use signatures anymore, and secondly, it means that from a basic protection point of view, we're all pretty much at the same kind of speed now. So this idea of defense in depth to make your protection better probably doesn't stand up anymore. And actually, the concept of having multiple different vendors probably exposes you to risk. Let me elaborate on that. If you're running one firewall vendor and you're running a different endpoint vendor, you've got multiple dashboards, different terminology, different methodologies for protection, and you might accidentally misconfigure one because you can't be an expert in everything, right? It's not possible. So having common language and configuration is a big advantage of vendor consolidation. The other one is obviously the speed and efficiency management, which is kind of a given. What I would say, and this comes on to what makes Sophos different from other vendors, we have a very strong firewall, we have a very strong endpoint, we have a great story around things like public cloud, even down to things like switching and wireless access points. We, however, don't just have a portfolio of products that we just have. We have a bunch of products that actually work cohesively as a system. So one of the things that does stand us apart and gives better security outcomes is if you have your endpoint and your firewall from Sophos, for example, they actually collaboratively work together. The firewall automatically blocks certain things if it sees an endpoint compromised. An endpoint can share information about applications with the firewall and it can respond proactively. A compromised endpoint can tell the wireless access point that it's got a problem, so the access point doesn't give it internet access. And if you conduct a threat hunt, then your firewall, your switches, and your access points are all cutting off devices that might have a problem. So this cohesive cybersecurity ecosystem, let's say, is actually one of the really big things that stands us out as well. So all of a sudden, the advantages that might be perceived about having multiple security vendors is more than outweighed by the possibility of having cybersecurity work together as a system under one management platform. So that hopefully answers that question, both parts of it.
It does. Thank you. Thanks very much, John. Literally, last question. It's going to have to be a quick touch on this one because we're a couple of minutes before 11.
I'll try.
Thank you. But do any of this is one I get from my customers all the time? Do any of Sophos's products have a positive knock-on effect on cyber insurance costs?
All of them. And that's probably pretty much universally true of buying any cybersecurity product, let's face it. Cyber insurance works like car insurance, right? The more risk factor you are, the more you're going to pay in a premium, right? So if we all hop out in the car park, we can go and pull out the cars that are more expensive to insure intrinsically, yeah? Cyber insurers look at things in the same way. I mean, if you're running bad practices, if you're not compliant with various bits of legislation, if you don't have a threat hunting team, you're more of a risk, right? So you will pay a higher premium. Now, you can very easily go to your cyber provider and say, hey, I just bought MDR, and that means that I have a team of experts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they are covering me. If you buy our MDR complete package, it will also include incident response. So then you can go back to your insurer and say, hey, I'm covered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and if they make a mistake, it is beholden on them to fix it. And then all of a sudden your risk factor and the likelihood of them paying out, which is, let's face it, is what they're really interested in, is just massively reduced. So yeah, there is a massive correlation between investing in cyber. It's certainly in the right products and the right services and getting a reduction in premium. So yeah, 100%. And you should always go back to your cyber insurer and say, I just invested in this, I just did that, so on and so forth. And you should always be asking them for an enhanced premium.
John, thank you very much for your time. It's been hugely informative. Just a brilliant talk there. For everyone in the audience, there will be a recording of this session. It will be posted on our ADM YouTube channel and sent out to you, along with any other resources. I'm just pinging something in the chat now as well, just if you need to get in touch or have any further questions or follow-ups. John, just while I'm doing that, do you want to plug your LinkedIn or anything?
Yeah, well, it's really easy to find. So I'm Jon, Jon Hope. If you want to reach out to me directly, then I have the easiest email address in the world. I am Jon, Jon at sophos.com. Yes, I've been at Sophos long enough to have that email address. So yeah, once again, it's Jon, Jon at sophos.com.
Perfect. Right. Thank you very much, all. We'll wrap this up now. And yes, thanks again, John.
You're very welcome. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.